Hello, coming to you from St. Marin de Porres. I would like to meditate with you on the book of Revelation and on certain aspects of it. Now, obviously, we won't be going too in depth, but I think some of the symbolic and liturgical undertones in it might enable us to see what God is trying to convey to us through this book. The first thing that I would like to say about the book of Revelation is that we're not entirely sure if the John who authored it is John the Apostle or a prominent figure within the community of St. John who had the same name as him. So that's a first point, that we're not entirely sure if it's St. John the Apostle or another figure within his community that wrote the book of Revelation. But as you'll note, in the beginning it says, I, John, and it goes on and on. So, John, we can take it for granted that John means St. John the Apostle. But there are other cases, for instance, the 3 letters of St. John. In those letters, it makes reference to how they were written by John the Elder. Is John the Elder the same person as St. John the Apostle? Or is it a different figure within his community? Although early on, we assume that they were one and the same person, later reflection has led to a dispute as to if the author is one and the same John the Apostle. So as a beginning point, I want to note that. But it's important because we need to recognize that who wrote the book of Revelation doesn't cause it to not be the word of God if it weren't John the Apostle. Because you have to remember that the New Testament was written by either the apostles or disciples of the apostles. So it's entirely legitimate if it was written by a disciple of John the Beloved. So we have to keep that in the back of our minds. And this is a principle for looking at all the New Testament, that if there's ever something in the New Testament that we might say was written by a disciple, which is the case in some works, like for instance, look at the Gospel of Luke, that's written by a disciple of the apostles, this shouldn't cause us concern. But anyways, whether it's St. John the Apostle or another figure by the name of John within the community of the apostle, it's still a divinely inspired book. It's a giving, a handing on of the tradition given to the apostles by Christ. And so that's the next point I would like to mention, that regardless of the nuance in the symbols that are offered in the book of Revelation, the core message of Revelation is the very gospel of Christ. See, many will look at the book of Revelation and see in it a prophetic outline of the future. But if we focus on that as the primary meaning of the book of Revelation, we'll miss the actual point of the book. You see, it is about prophecy. By prophecy in the original sense of the term, we will often think of the word prophecy and think of a foretelling of the future. But no, prophecy, more importantly, is the giving of a message of God to his people. Sometimes that can entail foreknowledge of things to come, but it does not necessarily entail that. Prophecy fundamentally is about the giving of a message of God to his people. So I want us to understand that the book of Revelation is a prophetic message of Christ. It is the giving of his gospel anew to his church. It's not so much about the future, but it's about prophecy in the original sense of the term. proclaiming the person of Jesus to his bride, the church. And that is exactly why nuptial imagery occurs throughout the book of Revelation, particularly towards the end, where it says that there will be the union between Christ and his church, which has already happened. But we're always entering more and more into that. So when the book of Revelation culminates in the marriage supper between the bridegroom and the bride, Christ and the church, it's not to say that that has not already happened, but rather that this is something that we are entering into more deeply as we partake of the Eucharist, as we become his body all the more by partaking of his body in communion. So it's really a message from the bridegroom to his bride. That is why, like I said, Revelation closes with strong nuptial imagery, and there is a lot of nuptial imagery in between, but it also opens with a message of Christ to 7 local churches. So once again, the book, from its inception to its conclusion, is meant to be a prophetic proclamation of who Jesus is to his bride, the church. Yes, there will be moments where things pertaining to the future are discussed, but that's not the primary focus. A third point that I'd like to mention is that although there is futuristic imagery offered, Revelation will speak of both the past, the present, and the future. See, I want you to think of it from this vantage point. If you look at a beautiful diamond and you see the light refract off that diamond, you'll notice that the light will sparkle in a variety of colors simultaneously. So you might want to focus on a certain aspect of the diamond, right, and that light radiating off of it. But there are other colors refracting off of the diamond. And it's only when we see the picture as a whole do we properly understand the beauty of that moment. Well, so also is the book of Revelation. I want you to think of it like this. Just as when you look at the diamond, you see all that beautiful light and colors refract in the same instant. So also in the book of Revelation, as John beholds the mysteries of the kingdom of God, and once again, I'm not going to say whether or not this is John the Apostle or another John in the community of the Apostle. But anyways, when John beholds these heavenly realities, right, he sees what was, what is, and what is to come. When you dive into the divine mystery, everything to God is present in the same instant. But for us, it varies, right? In other words, what is the past for us is always present to God. What is the present for us is always present to him. And what is to come for us is already present before him. There is no past or future for God. There is simply the present. That's what we mean by eternity. Well, when you behold the mystery, when you gaze at the divine diamond, if you will, you see all aspects of our time in a single instant for him. And so as John beholds this mystery, there are times when he will recount the past. So for instance, there's a reference in Revelation 12 where there's the fall of the angels. Now, clearly John was not beholding something that was to come. The fall of the angels happened long ago. So we have to be careful that when we're looking at Revelation, we're not necessarily looking at a chronological timeline, but rather John is beholding things of God, and we have to discern which things apply in different places. So for instance, Revelation 12 is something that's clearly in the past. Towards the end, the reference to the second coming of Christ, coming on the white horse with a sword at his thigh, and etc., etc. That's clearly the future. And then other moments when John is beholding the angels of God worshiping and all the saints worshiping around the divine throne, that's the presence. That's already what is happening. And when we worship during the Eucharist, all of our prayers are being caught up to that moment. So I use those three key examples to show you that as John is looking at the mystery, he sees things that were, like the fall of the angels, things that are, the continual offering of worship in the heavenly liturgy, and then things that shall be, the second coming. So I hope these points offer us a foundation for looking at the book of Revelation. And as a closing point, when we look at the symbolism of any futuristic activity that John will describe, it is possible that some of the things he's describing are present realities that he was dealing with, and they could also be a foreshadowing of things to come. So for instance, let me be blunt, the reference to the mark of the beast, 666, it seems to be the case that that is an allusion to the Emperor Nero, whose name numerically tallies up to 666. So when John says, this is the mark of the beast and is easily understood, could very well have meant, in a very symbolic fashion, the Emperor Nero. But that doesn't exclude the possibility that it equally means at the same time that there will be a figure to come who will be even worse than Nero. So in other words, in the epistles of St. John, there are a plurality of antichrists that are referred to. That is to say, those who act contrary to Christ. So throughout salvation history, there can be a number of figures that hold the name of Antichrist or hold the position of Antichrist, which means that John, by making reference to the mark of the beast as being 666, can simultaneously refer to not just an Antichrist during his time, the Emperor Nero, but an Antichrist that is to come. So that's an important nuance, and I want to offer that as a closing point, that there are even things that refer to the presence in John's time that could also have a double meaning and be a foretelling of a future events. So it's not just that something that he is speaking of is only in the past, only in the present, only in the future. It could be a plurality of these things at the same time. Like I said, the case of 666, that could be the Emperor Nero and another Antichrist to come. So I hope that makes sense. So remember, the four key points is, the first is that we don't know exactly who John is, whether it's John the Apostle or one of his disciples in his community, but nevertheless, whoever it was inspired by the Spirit of God, caught up to heavenly realms by revelation, and given this message. The second point is that this is a prophetic text, but prophetic in the original sense of the term. It is the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus to his bride, the church. The third point is that when we behold the divine mystery, we see various aspects of time. And so when you look at Revelation, you shouldn't think of a chronological timeline. You should discern the difference, that some of the things described are actually in the past, some are in the present, and then some are going to be in the future relative to us. But before God, they are all present. And then lastly, building off on the third point, there are references to things like the issue of the Antichrist that could have a double meaning. They could be both a reference to something that was already in the present for John, but was also a sign of something to come in the future. So I hope this is a good foundational uh, unpacking of Revelation. Maybe one day we'll be able to go more in depth, but I hope these foundations are nourishing and are a blessing to you. And I hope you just have a peaceful day. Peace.